On this vote, the yeas are 227, the nays are 205. The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
There wasn't a lot of surprise that the bill was able to get through the House of Representatives. They're in a situation now where they feel like they have to do something. And if they don't deliver something to their voters, that they're going to get shellacked in 2018. They know they might get shellacked anyway, but they figure, well, if we're going to get shellacked anyway, might as well do this. And the final one is the dynamic that we came to many times during the Obamacare repeal vote, where it's much easier to vote for something that you know is not headed to the president's desk immediately. So in other words, this is kind of a rough draft of a tax cut bill. And now they pass it over to the Senate, and the Senate is going to pass something different. Ron Johnson, a senator from Wisconsin, has already said he's a no. He put out a statement and gave some interviews saying that the process around the tax cuts was deplorable, and that because of the way it treats small businesses, and not small businesses, but what are called pass-through entities, these closely held private corporations, of which he is a member of one. He's made millions through his wife's dad's company in Wisconsin. That they are disadvantaged by this tax bill. The tax rate would come down to 20% for corporations, but would stay higher for these pass-through corporations, for these small and very large businesses set up as LLCs or S-corps or these other types of entities. And so he said, there's no way I'm going to vote for something that disadvantages companies like that against giant corporations. He doesn't mention that his own wealth comes from one of these companies that's being disadvantaged, but in some ways it doesn't matter. He's right that it does set up an uneven playing field. And so he said he's been trying to get them to fix this for the entire time, and they've refused to listen to him, hates the process, so he's voting no unless they fix that. Fixing that would cost billions, and it's if not trillions, and so it's unclear if they're going to be able to do that. So that takes them from 52 votes down to 51. Lisa Murkowski has said that she's not voting for anything that has the individual mandate repeal in it unless they do this other reform, Murray Alexander, first. So they're going to have to yank the individual mandate out if they want her vote. Susan Collins, Bob Corker, Jeff Flake, all are looking iffy too. So the politics of this are looking very dicey for Mitch McConnell. Meanwhile, you had this amazing moment recently where Gary Cohn, who is the chief White House economic advisor, the former president of Goldman Sachs, who was responsible in many ways for transforming the bank into what it became and helping to crash the entire global economy. He was at an event the other day with a bunch of CEOs, and there was this absolutely amazing moment where the interviewer says, I just want to ask the audience here, who here, you guys all control billions in capital. If you get a tax cut, are you going to invest it in your companies?
If the tax reform bill goes through, do you plan to increase investment, your company's investment, capital investment? Just a show of hands, the tax reform goes through? Okay.
Why aren't the other hands up?
Why aren't the other hands up?
John, I've got a question quick for...
Cynical people might think that, well, they're just going to, whether or not they're going to do it, they're going to raise their hands and say that they're going to do it. But there is an ethic in American business that you have to be honest about this kind of thing. Otherwise, you could be breaking securities laws. And there's this weird thing in Wall Street where you can get dinged for little tiny violations while you can crash the global economy and walk away free. But if you get caught breaking some smaller rule, you could actually get in trouble. Nobody would have gotten in trouble, yes or no, for raising their hand or not raising their hand, but that ethic kind of collapses down into an environment like that. And so you look around the room and only a couple hands went up out of this whole room of CEOs because they were mostly being honest. The history shows, as TYT has been reporting over the last several months, the history shows that when companies are given these tax breaks, they do not, as they imply that they're going to do and as politicians say they're going to do, invest it in more jobs. They do not raise wages. Often, they actually use the burst of cash to create more automation, so actually end up cutting jobs, because in the short run, cutting jobs actually costs money. You take a hit for all the severance and all the logistics and the relocation and the movement and getting a new factory in China or India or wherever. And so you actually need some capital. And all of a sudden, here comes a tax cut. So in some ways, tax cuts may be more likely to lead to job losses than job gains, but they certainly don't lead to job gains. Apple, as you know, we have that one up here right now. Apple is the perfect case in point. They may have more cash than any other company in the world, most of it stashed overseas because they're hiding it from U.S. taxes. This would allow them to bring a lot of that cash back into the United States at a greatly reduced rate, 12% rather than what they actually owe. And they use that 12%, that kind of pays up front for a lot of these tax cuts down the road, because most of this is gimmicks. They're giving real tax cuts and getting kind of fake revenue up front out of it, fake one-time revenue that they'll never get again. And so then the argument is, well, look, Apple is going to be able to bring all this money into America, and all of a sudden they're going to be investing in all of these American jobs. That actually doesn't make any sense. Apple has access to as much capital as it could possibly need. As this TYT story points out, they recently gave, what, $14 billion in dividends? Some astounding money. This is dividends. This is just cash that they're handing out to their investors, their shareholders. If they felt like it was a better use of their money to invest it in a factory or some other opportunity here in the United States, there's no situation in which Apple sees that opportunity and then says, boy, we could have a profitable venture right there in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Unfortunately, we just have no money. We are so broke that we're going to let that profitable opportunity pass us by. If only we could get a tax cut and bring in that money, then we could open up that factory in Tulsa. That's absurd. If Apple thinks that it could make money by building a factory or by hiring more workers in Tulsa, Oklahoma, they would immediately build a factory in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's just basic common sense. Whether they do it with offshore money, whether they do it with money that they borrow from Goldman Sachs, whether they do it for money they don't give out as dividends, whatever, they have access to money.
So just to let you know, Ryan, there's a choice of faces. Once in a while you get a heart, but mostly it's just this glowering, angry face that's coming. I think it's because they're mad at the policy, not you. Hesh Diesel wants to know if this will impact Obamacare, and Lauren Pierce is saying, will the passing of this tax bill, I guess she's assuming it will pass, hurt the GOP in 2018, or will it go unnoticed until after the midterms and maybe the impacts are felt?
So yes, so the individual mandate is kind of a cornerstone of Obamacare, and it is the kind of the most objectionable piece of it, because it's demanding that if you can afford to buy this product from a private company, that you do so. What the government is offering you in return for that indignity is saying, well, we promise to regulate this product so that they're not ripping you off, and we promise that your contribution into this ecosystem is allowing not just yourself to get affordable health care, but everybody else in the country. It is a twisted way of doing taxation, and the Supreme Court ended up saying that actually this is a taxation, and that's why it's constitutional. Otherwise, there was this argument that this should have been struck down as that in the sense that you can't mandate somebody to buy a private product. So that is still the least popular element of Obamacare, because nobody likes to spend money on insurance. And so Republicans are saying, well, what we're going to do this time, instead of trying to repeal all of Obamacare, we're just going to repeal the individual mandate so that people no longer have to buy insurance. And that might be good for some young, healthy people, but it threatens the entire system in the sense that if enough healthy people step out, premiums have to go up to make up for that. As premiums go up, fewer people can get in. Because you have to cover pre-existing conditions, you can wait until you get sick and then you can get health coverage. So more and more people drop out, prices go up, the prices going up causes more people to drop out, and that's what they call the death spiral. So that's the probable and predicted result of stripping the individual mandate out of there. So while it might be immediately good for a few people who don't have to then buy health insurance, everybody suffers because the system ends up collapsing. Maybe that gets you to single payer faster, but I never want to wish kind of misery on people in order to get to a non-miserable place. I'd prefer that people just be non-miserable off the bat.
Well, let's say it passes without that, and it's basically the House bill.
Otherwise it doesn't really touch the Affordable Care Act.
Okay, and so the second question was, how do you think it will impact the way that voters look at Republicans?
There are some real political minds in here for Republicans. You've got no longer being able to deduct medical expenses, no longer being able to deduct student loans. When more than half the population is still paying off their student debts, the idea that you would kind of poke them in the eye on something like that, because that's the kind of indignity that even if the write-off on your taxes only ends up saving you a couple $100, come tax season, it's also the indignity. It's like, you're really going to fund an estate tax repeal by trying to squeeze a few extra dollars out of people who are struggling to pay their student loans? So that has not just that has an emotional resonance to it, and people very often vote emotionally, and that's the kind of thing that you can also easily explain to somebody that can get them angry and get them out to vote. Not being able to deduct state and local taxes is a way of dinging anybody that lives in an area that decently funds its public schools. It's kind of an attack on public schools and local public institutions. Shrinking the mortgage interest deduction could and is expected to drive down housing prices. So people say, well, the mortgage interest deduction, they're going to move it down to $500,000. So anybody with a mortgage that's $500,000 or less won't get affected. That's not true, because the housing market is one big thing. And so if expensive homes become cheaper, then your home becomes cheaper. Now, if you don't own a home yet, you might be wishing for home prices to go down so that you can get into the market. And there's some arguments to be made that housing prices are absolutely too high. More than half of people do own homes, though, and so they're going to be pissed off come 2018 as well.
Justin Hardin says, boycott Apple. And GOJ Scott says boycott Apple, excuse me. And Justin Hardin is the one who says, how does this affect the
Eric
work?
read that from an Apple.
Not only did I read it from an Apple that's here, there's an Apple behind you, and it's an Apple phone that's webcasting.
The Apple story is on an Apple screen. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
So Justin was actually the one who was asking about the working class, which he defines as $65,000 salary and down.
Well, there's a couple ways of looking at this. Once you get rid of some of these deductions, they're not really coming back. I mean, Democrats are very unlikely to say, let's say they come back. Let's say the federal government makes $10 billion over 10 years by nailing you over your student loans, right? $10 billion. Democrats will say that's terrible, we're going to vote against that now. If Democrats retake power, maybe if they run on reversing that, it could happen. But in general, once it's gone, it's going to be gone. Because when Democrats are going to spend money, they're going to be spending money on making Obamacare more affordable, expanding food stamps, investing more money in education, like the basic. You're going to hit the basic things that are the most in demand and the most popular, and then if you had money left over, you would come back and you would return the deductions for the mortgage interest and state and local taxes and student lending. But those are not the top priorities, and so this is one of the ways that the working class gets hit here, is that the working class needs much more help, and in order to get more help, you have to get tax money and more revenue from somewhere, unless you want to talk about MMT, modern monetary theory, which we can talk about later. But let's operate under the rubric that you have to somehow pay for what you're doing, which isn't true, but let's operate under the assumption that you do. That means you no longer have those deductions to go after to pay for things that you want if and when you finally do take power. Instead, those deductions and everything are going away in order to just fund huge tax cuts for corporations and 40-year-olds who are inheriting $1 billion from their grandfather.
And the tax cuts that are good for corporations and the wealthiest of the wealthy are permanent, while anything that's in there that's good for regular people expires. Right.
Yes, that's exactly right. And in some ways, people are getting hit with with higher taxes. Certainly, if they do this individual mandate thing, if you do end up getting a tax cut, they're doubling the standard deduction, which would be a tax cut for people in that range that he talked about. But if they also get their premiums doubled or tripled, then there goes that tax cut.
That was Bernie Sanders' argument for universal health care.
Yeah.
In
Sure.
reverse.
Right. Your taxes will go up a little bit, but your health care will go down. So, right, the Republicans are doing the reverse, that, hey, we're going to give you a tax cut, but your health insurance costs are going to go way up.